A long time ago, about 25 years ago now, when I started my career as a psychologist, I used to get asked a question a lot. And the number one question that I would be asked was, what do I do when? And then you fill in the blank. What do I do when my child is hitting their kid brother? What do I do when my child is being rude to me? What do I do when my child won't get ready on time to leave the house? And the honest to goodness truth is, if you ask me the question, what do I do when? My answer is going to be, I don't know. And then I'm going to charge you $250. And the reason for that is, I don't know your child. And I don't know you. And I don't know what happened at your dinner table last night. And I don't know about the fight that you had with your husband 2 weeks ago that the children watched. And I don't know what's happening on the playground for your child when they head off to school. So who would I be to tell you what it is that you need to do for your children? In fact, I would suggest to you that if anybody anywhere is telling you what to do with your children, you are being sold a line. That's not going to work. Instead, we have to take a step back and consider what it means to be for our children. And so to that end, I developed a mantra that I teach to all of my clients. And the mantra begins with see it. This is going to take you about 1 second. You're going to look at the behavior that's happening for your child. You're going to see that they just hit their brother. And then you're going to immediately go behind the wall of that behavior, behind the facade of the behavior, into the heart of the child. And you're going to feel for the child. What's actually going on for them that they just hit their brother? What's happening on the inside of them? Now there's a catch. And the catch is this. How many of you wake up in the morning and you're like, you know what? Today's the day. I'm going to show up for my kid. I'm going to be really loving. I'm going to be really understanding. Be so kind. You might meditate a little bit just to make sure you're going to really nail it, you know? And then 32 minutes later, you're yelling at your kid, what did we just talk about? Right? And you become that yelly, shouty parent that you had promised you were not going to be like that day. And the reason that that happens is that we also have to check in with ourselves. Because actually, the most important thing we can do in terms of growing our children up is to realize we often have a lot of growing up to do first. If we're going to stay regulated for our children, we have to be regulated within ourselves. And that's where the work of consciousness comes in, where we understand that we're triggered not because of how our child is behaving, but rather because our children's behavior awakens inside of us a wound that we've probably been carrying our whole lives. The wound might be something like you don't feel good enough. The wound might be something like you're worried you're going to wreck them and then everybody's going to judge you, right? And so the point is that you have to be able to check in with self before and alongside checking in with your children. And only then can you show up and be who it is that your child needs for you to be. That discipline, in the way that we speak about it consciously and from an attachment and developmental perspective, discipline has very little to do with your children's behavior and everything to do with yours. And so we're going to take a really long, hard look in the mirror, and we're going to make sure that the way we're showing up for our children aligns with the science and the heart of child development. To do that, we need to talk about the most important thing. And Deborah would have introduced you to some of these concepts already this morning. The most important thing is the profound role of connection in the development of our children. You see, the human brain doesn't fully develop until somewhere between 25 and 30 years of age. A little earlier on that end of that age range for girls, a little later in that age range for boys, not because boys are behind. And instead because boys actually have a different system that's developing on a different timeline and a slightly different pathway in their brains. And they just need a little bit more time. We also know that human brains grow best when they are marinated in the experience of human connection. Now, you don't have to put your hand up. It's a rhetorical question. But remember the last time your partner or your best friend or maybe your parent gave you the silent treatment and how you felt inside. You're not settled and you're not regulated. And the reason for that is we are a social species by design. And because of that, we actually need connection, especially when we are children. We need connection in the same way that we need air. In fact, human children will die if they are brought into a world absent of connection. They'll develop a condition called failure to thrive, and they won't make it. So we need connection in the same way that we need air. And because it's so important, the research world gave it a name. They called it attachment. Now, that name really opens the door to an incredible history of understanding who humans are, who children are, what makes them tick. The other thing that I've noticed, and I don't know what it's like for you here in Romania, what I've noticed is that where I come from, Canada, when we say the word attachment, people have like ideas about that. You know, if you're attachment, you're a little bit like flaky. If you're attachment, you're a little soft, and you aren't really in charge of your children. You know, these kinds of ideas. And that's just pop culture. That's not the science of attachment. That's not the truth of what makes a child's world go round. The truth of what makes a child's world go round is that relationships build brains and relationships build hearts. And essentially what we're talking about is that we want for our children to be dependent upon us, not independent. And that's one of the things that we need to rework in terms of how we understand children. I remember when my boys were very little, somewhere around 6 weeks of age in Canada, we go for a postnatal checkup. And we take our baby in, and the doctor has a look over them, and we have some conversations about how it's going for the baby. And the message was that if your baby wasn't sleeping through the night by about 6 weeks, you needed to teach them how to be independent in the world of sleep. And I cry foul. Children don't need to be independent. They need to be deeply dependent. For dependency is the natural state of the human child, and it is out of the gift of deep dependence that true independence will eventually emerge. What happens to a plant if you pull on the top of it? Grow faster, grow better. You will uproot the plant. And what happens to an uprooted plant? They get dead. It doesn't turn out well for them, right? Now, children, in some ways, are a little bit like plants. Our job when the child is struggling is not to pull on the top and command and demand them to grow better and faster. Our job is to retreat to the environment and to take stock of what is going on around the child, to make sure that all of that is working for this child, who might be really different from this child. And what do we need to shift and change and sort out so that the world is working for the child, not that the child works for the world? Children are not tiny adults. And because they're not tiny adults, we cannot, by downward extension, take the expectations that we will have of them in adulthood and apply them to what the child is right now. If you want your child to be generous in adulthood, you don't make them be generous as a 4-year-old. What you do is you show up generously as a parent, and your child will marinate in your generosity. And that will take on many shapes and many forms as it grows, and eventually that tree will bear fruit. They will grow up to become generous, but it's going to look different at 4. Because at 4, they're not meant to be thinking about the needs of others. They're meant to be thinking about the needs of themselves. That's exactly what you should be doing when you're 4. Your 4-year-olds, they're not supposed to share. They don't know anything about sharing. And if you're one of those people who's going to clap back at me on Instagram and say, but my 4-year-old shares with people all the time, it's because your 4-year-old doesn't care. They're not actually sharing. They're just happy for whoever to play with whatever. But if they're really attached to something and it's their most special toy, they're not going to share because they're not supposed to. When they're 4 years old, they're supposed to think of themselves and themselves only. Normal. Your 9-year-olds are meant to have meltdowns as though they are 3 years old again when you tell them they must do chores before going outside to kick the ball around. Normal. Your 15-year-olds, how many of you in the room have teenagers right now? Oh, yes. You are in it to win it at 15. Your 15-year-olds, when you tell them that they can't go to that party on Friday night because you don't know the parents in that household and you don't know what's going to happen at that party, they are meant to give you the middle finger salute and tell you you are the worst parent in the history of all parents, because at 15, their job is actually to start stepping away from you into those early stages of getting their legs underneath them, because eventually they will become adults. And they need to try it on for size. And sometimes it's tricky for them, so the step away sometimes becomes a push away. Very normal. Nothing wrong with your 15-year-old. Where the problem begins is when the parent is like, ah! And starts to punish the child for showing up normally. I have green eyes. Imagine what it would be like if I were punished for having green eyes. You had like a terrible, no good, very bad, awful day at work, and you came in the front door. And I don't know about your homes, but in my front door, like we have shelves for the shoes to go on. There's a reason we have shelves. Because when we walk in the front door and the shoes are all over the floor, then I trip over them. And so let's pretend I've had this terrible, no good, very bad, awful day at work. I come in the front door and it's like shoe palooza. I'm just like tripping over the shoes. And my husband rounds the corner, and I don't have a lot of love in me at that moment, right? And so I get all grumpy at my husband. Let's imagine my husband, who's sitting right in the front row, let's imagine that he says to me, "What's the matter with you? Don't talk to me that way. No coffee for you tomorrow morning." Now, coffee to me is like life. Like I can't even think about a morning without coffee. And in that moment, do you think I'm like, I hear those words from my husband and I become instantaneously inspired to be loving and kind to him? I do not. I actually am inspired to be more wretched and more awful. Now imagine that I've come through the front door and it's shoe palooza and I've had this terrible day and my husband rounds the corner and I get all grumpy with him and he just looks at me with soft eyes and says, tricky day, hey? Listen, why don't you go have a bath? I'm going to get dinner sorted for the kids. Let's get homework done and everybody off to bed. And then I'm going to meet you on the couch with a glass of wine. And I want to hear all about it. Now I'm inspired. Do you feel me? Now I'm like, oh, okay. I can feel that terrible, no good, very bad, awful day just sort of leave my system. And I get to decompress. So you can understand then how the consequence has at its core this experience of disconnection. The way that you come up with the consequence that you're going to use against your child, the way you come up with that is because you are in a relationship with them. You know what's important to them in the same way that my husband knows coffee is my world, right? And because you know what's important to them, then you're like, ha-ha, I shall use this against you to control your behavior. What? They're not inspired in those moments. It's just going to make life more challenging down the road because it creates that discipline vortex. The same thing when we remove privileges from our children. How do you come up with that zinger of a privilege that you're going to take away? Because you know them. You're in an intimate relationship with them, and we use it against them. The final one I want to talk about is reward systems. How is it that a reward system is disconnection-based. Well, think about what's the opposite of getting the star on the star chart? Not getting a star. Do you see how it's a consequence in disguise?